The sound of a zipper closing usually signals the start of a journey, a vacation, or a new chapter. But tonight, in the hallway of the home I spent 40 years paying for, it sounded like a scream. It was a sharp, metal shriek that tore through the heavy silence of the house, signaling the end of my life as I knew it. I stood there, my hand trembling slightly on the handle of the suitcase. It was a cheap, battered thing, the fabric worn thin at the corners. The same bag I had packed 4 decades ago when Martha and I moved into this house with nothing but hope and a baby on the way. Now, that baby was standing 3 feet away from me, refusing to meet my eyes, and I was leaving with less than I started with. I am Elias Thorne. I am 72 years old. My hands are rough, the knuckles swollen with arthritis, and the fingerprints permanently stained with the grease of 1,000 engines fixed in 1,000 different garages. I spent my life under the hoods of cars, ensuring other people could get where they needed to go, while I stayed put, building a foundation for my family. I thought that foundation was made of concrete and love. I was wrong. It was made of sand, and the tide had finally come in. My daughter, Sarah, stood by the entrance to the living room. Her arms were crossed tight over her chest, a defensive barricade constructed to keep out guilt. She stared intently at a scuff mark on the baseboard, studying it as if it held the secrets of the universe, just so she wouldn't have to look at the father she was evicting. Behind her, leaning against the doorframe of the kitchen, was her husband, Mark. He was looking at his phone, his thumb scrolling rhythmically, the coward's way of avoiding the man whose pension paid for the roof currently keeping the rain off his head. The air in the hallway was thick, humid with the smell of my own humiliation. It tasted like copper in the back of my throat. "It's just not working, Dad," Sarah said. Her voice was thin, reedy, devoid of the warmth I remembered from her childhood. It sounded rehearsed, like a speech she had practiced in the mirror while I was out buying her groceries. "We need the room, you know that." I looked at Mark. He didn't look up from his screen. A home office. The man sold insurance over the phone. He didn't need an office, he needed a spine. "There are 3 bedrooms, Sarah," I said, my voice rasping. It sounded old, even to me. "I stay in the smallest one. The baby can have the nursery." "The den is damp," Mark said, finally looking up. His eyes were cold, flat. "And clients can hear the TV when you watch your shows." "I watch the news," I said. "It's not just the volume, Dad," Sarah interrupted, her voice rising, gaining the confidence of someone who has already made up their mind and just wants the unpleasantness to be over. "It's the cost, the electricity, the food, the extra heating. We can't keep supporting you." Supporting me hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I felt my grip on a suitcase handle tighten until my knuckles turned white. Supporting me? I signed the deed to this house over to her 3 years ago. It was supposed to be a formality, a way to avoid inheritance taxes, a way to give her security after Martha passed. She had cried then, thanking me, promising I would always have a place. My Social Security check went into their joint account every month to cover expenses, an amount that far exceeded the cost of the toast and soup I consumed. "I pay my share, Sarah," I said quietly. "It's not enough," she snapped. She finally looked at me, and I wish she hadn't. There was no love in her eyes, only annoyance. Only the irritation one feels when dealing with a stubborn stain that won't wash out. "Look, we found a place for you. The shelter downtown has beds. It's only for a few nights until you get sorted. We need our space. You're just—" The words hung in the air like smoke in a windowless room. Dead weight. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I didn't remind her that I wiped her tears when she was 5 and scraped her knee. I just nodded. I swallowed the lump of glass in my throat and accepted the truth. I was an object to them, an appliance that had stopped working and was taking up valuable floor space. "Dead weight," I repeated softly. "Okay." I picked up my bag.
It was light. A lifetime of hard work and memories reduced to 2 pairs of trousers, a few shirts, a razor, and a framed photograph of Martha. That was all I was allowed to take. The furniture, the tools in the garage, the books, they stayed. They were assets. I was a liability. I walked toward the front door. My bad hip throbbed, a deep, dull ache that synchronized with the pounding of the rain against the roof. Neither of them moved. Neither of them offered to drive me. Neither of them asked where I would go or if I had money for a cab. They just watched, waiting for the glitch in their perfect life to remove itself. I opened the door. The wind hit me instantly, cold and wet, soaking my thin jacket within seconds. I stepped onto the porch. The darkness of the night was absolute, swallowing the neighborhood I had lived in for 40 years. I turned back once, just once. I wanted to see if there was a flicker of regret. I wanted to see my little girl run out and tell me she didn't mean it. The porch light flicked off. The click was audible even over the wind. They didn't even wait for me to reach the sidewalk. They erased me. I was alone in the dark, an old man discarded like a rusted part that could no longer be fixed. I walked. I didn't know what else to do. My truck was sold 2 years ago to help them with a down payment on a boat they never used. So I walked. The rain plastered my gray hair to my skull. Cars drove past, their headlights blinding me, their tires spraying freezing muck onto my trousers. I kept my head down, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. If anyone is listening, if you are sitting in a house you paid for but feeling like a guest in your own life, don't make the mistake I did. Don't trust blindly just because of blood. I walked into the storm knowing that the people who share your blood are often the first ones to draw it. You need to hit that subscribe button because you need to see what happens when the dead weight suddenly tips the scales. You need to be warned. I walked 3 miles. My hip felt like it was grinding bone on bone, a fire that shot up my spine with every step. I finally saw the flickering neon sign of the Starlight Motel. I pushed open the door to the lobby. It smelled of stale cigarette smoke, lemon cleaner, and despair. The clerk was a young woman with tired eyes and purple hair. She looked up from a magazine, taking in my soaked appearance, the shivering, the cheap suitcase. One night, I rasped, reaching into my pocket. My hands shook as I counted out the crumpled bills. $38. It was almost everything I had in my wallet. $45 with tax, sweetie, she said, popping her gum. Then she looked at my face. She saw the grief etched into the lines around my eyes. Her expression softened. You know what? 30 is fine. Pity. I hated pity. It tasted worse than the rain, bitter and cloying. But I took it. I didn't have a choice. Thank you, I whispered. I took the key, a heavy brass thing attached to a green plastic diamond. Room 104. Inside, the room was freezing. The carpet was sticky, and the wallpaper was peeling in the corner like sunburned skin. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, water dripping from my nose onto my knees. I was wet, cold, and homeless. I was 72 years old, and I had nothing. Except I wasn't broke. I reached into the inside pocket of my soaked jacket, my fingers trembling not from the cold, but from the secret I had been carrying since 10 o'clock this morning. It had been 6 hours since I bought it, 6 hours before they kicked me out. I pulled out a small pink slip of paper. It was dry. I had kept it wrapped in a plastic sandwich bag, a habit from my mechanic days to keep receipts clean. A lottery ticket. I had stopped at the corner store this morning to buy milk. Sarah liked almond milk in her coffee, and we were out. I walked a mile to get it. While I was at the counter, the clerk convinced me to buy a ticket. The jackpot was historic, he said. I bought it on a whim. I hadn't gambled in years. Martha always said it was a tax on hope. I checked the numbers in the store. I checked them again in the parking lot. I checked them a third time in the bathroom before Sarah told me to pack my bags. $50 million. I held the ticket under the dim yellow light of the bedside lamp. The numbers hadn't changed. 04, 12, 28, 35, 41, 09. They stared back at me, black ink on pink paper. I had planned to tell them tonight over dinner. I had planned to slap the ticket on the table and watch their eyes light up. I had planned to pay off the rest of Mark's student loans. I had planned to buy them a vacation home on the lake Sarah always talked about. I had planned to set up a trust for the grandbaby. I was going to change their lives. I was going to be the hero. She chose greed over her father. She chose a home office over the man who built the home. She chose to throw me away before she knew I was made of gold. I stared at the ticket until my eyes burned. A laugh bubbled up in my chest, but it sounded like a sob. $50 million. I could buy this motel. I could buy the whole block. I could buy the company Mark worked for. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I moved the plastic chair to the window and sat there, watching the rain wash the grime off the parking lot asphalt. I watched the neon sign flicker. I thought about Martha. I thought about the day Sarah was born, how small she looked in my hands, how I promised to protect her from the world. I thought about the look on Mark's face when he slammed the door, the sheer indifference of it. The grief was a physical weight, pressing on my chest, heavier than the $50 million sitting on the nightstand. It felt like I was buried under 6 feet of heavy soil. But as the sun began to rise, turning the sky a bruised purple and gray, something changed. The grief began to harden. It cooled, crystallizing into something sharp and cold. It turned into steel. I wasn't just sad anymore. I was done. I stood up. My hip popped, but I ignored the pain. I walked over to the nightstand and picked up the phone book, an artifact almost as old as me, tucked into the drawer. I flipped through the yellow pages. I wasn't looking for a doctor. I wasn't looking for a shelter. I was looking for a name I hadn't spoken in a decade. James Jim Sterling. We served in Vietnam together. He was the guy you called when you were in a foxhole and the world was ending. He practiced law with the same ruthlessness he used in the jungle. We drifted apart after Martha died. I retreated into my grief, and he retreated into his work. I found the number. I picked up the motel phone, the cord tangled and greasy. I dialed. It rang 4 times. Then a gruff voice answered. "Jim?" I whispered. My voice was raspy from the cold and the silence of the night. "It's Elias?" There was a pause. "Elias? My God, it's been years." "No, Jim." I looked at the pink ticket on the table. I looked at the cheap suitcase in the corner. "I need you to meet me. Today." "Where are you?" "I'm at the Starlight Motel off I-95, I said. "And Jim, I need you to bring your best suit." Jim asked, his voice shifting from concern to curiosity. I picked up the ticket, holding it tight enough to crumple the edge. "Because I'm going on television." Visual beat. The camera focuses tight on the raindrops racing down the motel window, reflecting the neon buzz of the sign outside, before shifting focus to Elias's reflection in the glass. His eyes are no longer wet with tears, but dry, hard, and burning with a cold, terrifying resolve. Fade to black. The morning sun filtered through the grimy window of the Starlight Motel, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, suspended memories. I watched them, lying still on the lumpy mattress, my hip throbbing a dull, insistent rhythm. The dirt didn't bother me anymore. The peeling wallpaper, the sticky carpet, the smell of stale cigarettes. It was all just scenery now. This room wasn't a prison, it was a cocoon, and I was about to break out. At exactly 8 a.m., a sharp rap on the door pulled me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Jim Sterling standing there, looking like he had just stepped out of a boardroom in 1985. He was wearing a charcoal wool coat over a navy suit that cost more than my entire wardrobe. His hair was grayer than I remembered, and the lines around his eyes were deeper, etched by decades of fighting battles in courtrooms that were just as vicious as the jungles we survived. But his eyes were the same, hard, assessing, like granite chips. He looked at me, then at the cheap suitcase in the corner, then at the water stains on the ceiling. He didn't flinch. He just nodded, once. "Elias," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Jim," I replied, stepping back to let him in. He walked in, filling the small room with a presence that felt too large for the space. He looked at the scarred wooden table where the pink lottery ticket sat, weighed down by a plastic cup of lukewarm water. "Ticket?" he asked, pointing at the ticket without touching it. "It's real," I said, closing the door against the morning chill. "And so is the fact that my daughter threw me out on the street last night because I was a burden." Jim turned slowly to face me. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. He listened in silence as I recounted the eviction. I told him everything: the refusal to make eye contact, the way Mark looked at his phone, the porch light flicking off before I even reached the sidewalk. I told him about the rain and the 3-mile walk. I didn't cry. I was done crying. I spoke with the detached precision of a mechanic diagnosing a terminal engine failure. When I finished, the room was silent. Jim walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. "We can claim this anonymously," he said, his back to me. "Trusts, LLCs. We can set it up so no one ever knows. You can disappear to an island, Elias. Live like a king." "No," I said. The word came out sharper than I intended. I stood up, testing my hip. The pain was there, a familiar companion, but the adrenaline masked it, turning it into fuel. "She called me dead weight, Jim. She threw me away like trash because she thought I had no value. I want her to see exactly how heavy I really am. I want to collect it publicly. Today." Jim turned around. A slow, grim smile spread across his face. It was a wolf's smile. "Scorched earth," he said approvingly. The transformation began an hour later. Jim drove me to a high-end tailor downtown, a place with mahogany shelves and soft jazz playing in the background. The tailor, a small man with measuring tape draped around his neck like a priest's stole, didn't look down on my grease-stained jacket. He saw the way Jim carried himself and knew I was important. I traded my worn trousers and flannel shirt for a charcoal Italian suit that felt like silk against my skin. It fit like armor. I got a shave from a barber who used a straight razor and hot towels. When I looked in the mirror, the discarded old man was gone. The mechanic with the bad hip was gone. In his place stood Elias Thorne, a man who looked like he could buy and sell the world. We drove to the Lottery Commission headquarters in Jim's black sedan. The press had been alerted. The mystery winner of the state's largest jackpot was claiming the prize. The lobby was a zoo. Cameras were set up in a semicircle, microphones taped together like a bouquet of metal flowers. Flashing lights bounced off the polished marble floors. It was overwhelming. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. But then I thought of Sarah. I knew her routine. It was 12 p.m. She would be sitting on my couch, in the living room I painted, eating a sandwich made with bread I paid for, watching the noon news. She would be complaining to Mark about how quiet the house was, or maybe planning how to turn my room into a gym. I stepped onto the podium. The lights were blinding, hot against my face. A hush fell over the room. A young reporter in the front row thrust a microphone toward me. "Mr. Thorne, Mr." she shouted.
$50 million. It's the largest jackpot in state history. What's the first thing you're going to do? Will you be celebrating with family?" The room went quiet, waiting for the heartwarming soundbite. The "I'm going to take the grandkids to Disney World" speech. I looked directly into the camera lens. I imagined I was looking through the glass, through the miles of cable and airwaves, right into Sarah's living room. I imagined her face, mid-chew, freezing as she saw me. "I have no family," I said. My voice was steady, clear, amplified by the microphones until it filled the room. "My wife passed 5 years ago," I continued, holding the gaze of the camera. The reporters murmured, confused. The narrative was shifting, and they could smell the blood in the water. The young reporter pressed, "Neighbors?" I corrected her, my voice dropping an octave. "She and her husband kicked me out of her home. She put me on the street in the pouring rain because she needed a home office." A gasp rippled through the press corps. Pens scratched furiously against notepads. "So, to answer your question, no," I said, leaning into the microphone. "I won't be sharing this with family. I will be using this money to build housing for the elderly who have been discarded by ungrateful children. I'm starting the Martha Thorne Foundation today." I held up the giant check. The flash bulbs exploded like fireworks, a blinding storm of white light. In my pocket, my old flip phone began to vibrate. Bzzzt, bzzzt. It stopped. Then it started again. Bzzzt, bzzzt, bzzzt. It was relentless, a frantic, buzzing heartbeat against my hip. I didn't need to look at the caller ID. I knew who it was. It was Sarah. Then Mark. Then Sarah again. The dead weight had suddenly become gold, and the vultures were circling, desperate for a piece of the carcass they thought they had already picked clean. We left the commission through a side door. Jim shielded me from the shouting reporters, his arm like a steel bar across my back. We got into his car, the heavy door thumping shut and sealing out the noise. "Your phone is blowing up," Jim noted, glancing at the bulge in my pocket. "Let it burn," I said, staring straight ahead. We drove back to the Starlight Motel to collect my few belongings. But they were there. Of course they were there. Sarah's car was screeching into the parking lot just as we arrived. She parked crookedly, taking up 2 spaces, and jumped out before the engine even died. She was holding her phone, her hair messy, tears streaming down her face. They looked like rehearsed tears, the kind she used to cry when she wanted a new toy or a later curfew. Mark was behind her, looking pale and terrified, like a man who just realized he had thrown a winning lottery ticket into a bonfire. "Dad!" she screamed, running toward me as I stepped out of Jim's car. "Dad, we saw the news. It was all a mistake. We were just stressed. The hormones, the baby." I stood by the luxury car, my new suit crisp and clean. I looked at her, really looked at her. I didn't see my little girl anymore. I saw a stranger. I saw the greed in her eyes masking the panic. I saw the calculation. I saw the daughter I raised twisted into something unrecognizable by entitlement. "Mark," she begged, reaching for my arm. Her fingers brushed the fabric of my suit. "Come home. We can fix up the basement, or you can take the master bedroom. We'll move into the guest room. We love you." I gently removed her hand from my jacket. I dusted off the spot where she touched me, as if she had left a smudge of dirt. "You were right, Sarah," I said softly. My voice was devoid of anger. It was filled only with a terrible final peace. The kind of peace you feel when the storm finally breaks. "I was," she sobbed, grabbing at Mark's arm for support. "But now," I continued, looking her dead in the eye, "I've cut myself loose." I turned my back on her. I got into the car.
Jim shut the door with a solid, final thud. As we pulled away, I watched through the tinted glass.
Sarah was standing in the dirty parking lot of the Starlight Motel, screaming at the back of the car, her mouth open in a silent wail of loss. Mark was slumped against the hood of their vehicle, his head in his hands, defeated. I watched them shrink in the rearview mirror until they were just specks, just dust in the wind. I turned forward, toward the road, toward the future. The vibration in my pocket finally stopped.